Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today is Monday, April 25th, 2022. This is a budget workshop of the San Benito CISD Board of Trustees. I'd like to welcome everybody in the audience today. Let's start out with roll call. Ms. Janie Lopez.
Present.
Mr. Oscar Medrano.
Here.
Mr. Rudy Corona.
Present.
Dr. Ariel Cruz.
Present.
Mr. Orlando Lopez. Mr. Mario Silva. Ms. Teresa Cervellon.
Present.
Mr. Stephen Weller.
Present.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Weller.
Yes, sir. Good to see everybody.
Likewise. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Ms. Peggy, do we have any public comment? Okay, there is no public comment, so we move on to item 1.4, discussion regarding budget for the 2022-2023 school year.
Good evening, Board President Moreno, ladies and gentlemen of the board, Ms. Cervellon. This evening, we will be discussing the budget workshop. I do want to introduce my staff before we start. We have Mr. Chris Cortez, he's our accounting director, and Ms. Indira Arias, she is our business office accountant. Along with a couple of other members of our office, we are tasked with compiling a pretty big budget. There's a lot of moving parts, but when we take it step by step, it's easier to manage how we go about it. So tonight's part of the workshop, we're going to be discussing the revenues. So we'll go over the calendar and what we have done so far. And the calendar was the one that was on the, board docs. So I'll just go over very briefly, and if you have any questions at any point, please stop me. In February, we had discussions with the superintendent and leadership team. We discussed what...
Ms. Vicky, can I interject real quick? And I'm sorry, it's
That's
just
okay.
Formality. I know Chris, because I've known him for quite a while, Chris Cortez, but your other member is who?
Indira Arias.
Arias?
A-R-I-A-S.
And their positions again, Chris Cortez is the...
Accounting director, and Indira is business office accountant.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir, of course. So we had some discussions with the leadership team. We discussed any issues that may have come up over the year, any discussions that may have happened, and just kind of overall where we envision things going. We went over the preliminary revenues of the summary of finance. Mind you, that was in February. Since February, we have had a lot of changes come down from TEA, the biggest one being the hold harmless, and we will talk about that a little bit more. We had meetings with the principals and directors. So that meeting happened in the form of an email. We usually have it in person. So what I did was give them all the tools that they needed, gave them all the resources. I gave them videos on how to navigate the system. And the reason I did that was because in previous years we had new principals and directors. This year we had 100% returning directors and principals. So there wasn't a need for me to bring them in and show them step by step. They know what they're doing, they just need a little bit of a reminder. So I set up some videos, some questions and answers, some resources on where I got numbers and how we calculated their actual numbers for their campuses. And that form is given out to all of them. So it's all transparent. They see what each other has. And it's taken from the taper report. The snapshot report in October. So that information is all part of a disaggregated data form. That is also given to them. So that is put on our website for our employees only. So employees only can access it, our outside people cannot. And then we went over training on Skyward. If they needed additional training, most of the time it's like the same question. I can't see my budget. Well, you need to change the fiscal year. It is always the same thing. And that's okay. They do it once a year, so a little reminder doesn't bother me.
So, Ms. Perez, again, before moving on, you erroneously mentioned taper report. It's not the taper report?
No, it's the October snapshot.
October
Yes.
snapshot, okay.
Yes, sir. Taper would be far too back. So in March, we went over staffing reviews, and that took place with the Assistant Superintendent of Administrative Services, Academic Services, and Federal Programs, special ed director, myself, and the principal or director that we were visiting with. And all we did was go over what their staff looks like, what account codes they're being paid out of, make sure that everything is good, make sure that the intent of that position is indeed what that account code says that it's going to be doing. Made sure that all of that was clean, and if it wasn't, we made whatever changes we need to with payroll. And
I'm gonna interject again. I've got.
That's okay.
I really wanna make sure that I understand everything having to do with budget. I mean, I do use budgets, daily, but when you're saying you did a staffing review, you did a staffing review in relation to the existing staff. We're not talking about any projection staff, any upcoming FTEs, we're talking about current staff.
we were talking about current staff. That was led by Dr. Cruz. I know we went over what their master schedule looks like, what the ideal amount of teacher to students should be. And Dr. Cruz, is there anything you would like to add on that one, if you don't mind?
Good evening, Board President Moreno, members of the board, and Ms. Cervellon. During these staffing reviews, like Ms. Bettis mentioned, we met with the different campus administrators and department administrators. We had my staff there, Ms. Bettis' staff, special ed represented, and federal programs. We had an agenda. We went over the current staffing, what the numbers look like currently. We rolled those numbers, giving an enrollment estimate, what it might look like this coming school year, and then made recommendations as far as what we might be able to expect for this coming school year.
So I'd like to add, what was used was historical data. So all we did was roll up our first graders into second grade with the hopes that that would be the number that we have next year, even though there'll be some fluctuations. And you're going to notice that with our projection with revenues based on our ADA
Right.
Later on. So you may have questions about staffing related to that.
So do you keep the amount you have right now, like you said, you just roll it over, you don't increase or decrease, giving it a 10-point gap or something just in case?
No, we just use historical data?
During that initial review, we're using that year's data rolled. But of course, that's not the only review we do. We're constantly looking at the enrollment numbers. We're having a registration drive this week, trying to boost those numbers. So it's going to fluctuate from that first meeting all the way to past day one, unfortunately. So we're working with estimates. We look at the historical trends. If we're decreasing in enrollment, we don't want to overshoot if that has been the trend. So.
Which it has.
Is it my understanding that because of the pandemic and maybe less kids coming to school, that this is kind of something that is always done? Is it always using historical data, or is this kind of where we're at right now because of the situation?
We follow the same method we did every year, but knowing that, it has been unprecedented times in terms of this COVID situation, what it's done to our enrollment, and what it's done to, just schooling and staffing in general. So we definitely take that into account as we're planning and preparing.
And we definitely take the more conservative approach.
Yes.
As much, to the extent as much as possible, we do try to plan as conservatively as possible.
I don't know if this is the place to ask, but when you were going through those reviews with principals and directors, did you find maybe some staffing that wasn't needed?
Yes, so we had, it's much easier to determine those numbers at the elementary because it's, staffed in a much simpler way. Once we get this to the secondary models, it's dependent on what courses are going to be offering for the upcoming year, a course request coming from the students, the master schedule and any changes there. So that is it's a longer process and, it's a little more detailed. There's a little more cushion there as far as staffing is concerned, but yes, we did find that there should be decrease, but we also have to consider any changes that are, pending for the upcoming year, any possible programmatic changes, any initiatives that the district's going to have moving forward. So that will also impact our staffing recommendations.
Any other questions?
Previously, we had also gotten a staffing study done as well. Did y'all take that study into account as well when formulating this budget?
Yes, ma'am. We utilize our different resources that we have, our own historical data, that staffing model, of course. When that staffing review was done, we were already undergoing some changes, if you recall, when that was presented. So there were some things that had already happened that were taken care of. There were some programmatic changes that, didn't quite fit the representation that TASB was providing. And then with that study, they don't look at every single position as far as to compare market, to the market. So they may be combining, for example, all the HR positions when, we don't have a director, we have coordinators. So, there's some fluctuation there, but we do take into account all of our resources, including that study.
Right, okay. And you also mentioned that you all are taking previous data that has been accumulated over the past years. One of my concerns from the previous year was that we had to return some of the money back that was given to us because we didn't have the enrollment that you all had projected. So my concern is over-projecting as well. So are you all taking into account and not seeing this projection as a perfect world? Our hope is that we get all our students back and more, but are you taking into account student reductions in case that does happen?
Yes, so I got a trend analysis on what the decreases have been over the last few years, and I'll show you that graph in a little bit here shortly, and get an average of how much we decrease from one year to another to apply it to the next year. And so that, on top of calculating it on the assumption that we are going to have the $40,000 exemption passing, which would be a much more conservative approach as opposed to the $25,000 exemption on our taxable values. So that would lower our overall property values. So I don't want to overestimate that we're going to gain so many taxes. If that passes, that will have a significant impact on our property values. It might not have an impact on our taxes, but on the property values it will. So that's another part that we've taken into consideration as well.
Okay, so are you saying that you're taking a more conservative approach this year compared to last year?
We try to be as conservative as possible every year. This year, I am just a little bit more weary because I can see a downfall trend, and I don't see that it's going to get any better. So I would prefer that we underestimate as opposed to overestimating, or keeping at the status quo that we are right now. I would prefer that we just underestimate. And then if we have an excess amount of funds, then that's great. We will reallocate it back to the students towards the middle of the year whenever they figure that part out with our mid-year submission or the mid-year snapshot.
And you mentioned that you're more cautious this year because you have seen a downfall, and I know that in the budgeting tools that we received this year also from Region 1, it did show that in the past 5 years that we've been losing enrollment.
Yes.
So there's a trend already.
Yes. As a matter of fact, let me show you that real quick.
I want to make a point, and to where I was getting at, that's why I asked, what are we doing when we're doing these staffing reviews? Because once again, I'm not a guru at this. I've been in it for quite a while, but to me, you stated something, and then Dr. Cruz stated something that kind of sort of contradicts. Okay, so my question was, when we're looking at staffing reviews, once again, are we looking at staffing reviews with what we have now? And you said yes, and then Dr. Cruz says we're also making projections as to what we're going to need in the future. In my mind, I feel like we're working backwards. Because in my mind, I would think that we would need to know what we're going to be offering next year. For example, we had Mr. Fernando Rosa present to us the other day. These are the courses that we're going to offer next year for our students, which is great, right? Okay, so that's we're ahead of the game right there, right? But has that been done across the board where we've already looked at innovative courses, where we've already looked at what we're going to be bringing to the table next year prior to making these staffing reviews? Because I think if we're doing staffing reviews and looking into what we think, and it just seems to me that we're working backwards.
I don't work on the staffing reviews per se. I do
Okay.
on the enrollment, but I know that Dr. Cruz has a very specific method in when she does that.
Hi. So the initial review, we have to start somewhere. It's a snapshot in time. So that's the current view as is. But, every couple of weeks, new data is available, new information. We have to make adjustments as we go. The master scheduling, that's a work in progress, unfortunately. We always, I think every school district tries to get their master schedule done as quickly as possible. But it's a big feat, especially during these times, trying to get the students to respond to the course request and then plugging everything in. So we have ideas of what's ahead, and we do plan into our staffing models as quickly as possible. But, it's an ongoing process.
And that's understandable. I appreciate that. And as time ticks on, like you say, you'll have more student requests and see what those needs are, what their interests are. And so master schedule has a very strong chance of changing. So, okay, it makes sense. Thank you.
When do the students fill out their schedule requests? Do you know when?
I would like to interject something here. So in these reviews that we sat down, we discussed, we did talk about a master schedule timeline to ensure that we commence in October or in the fall. And if we're going to request new courses, whether they be innovative or they be CTE courses, that we start requesting them then so that we can put them into the master schedule. And so that way the students know that they're offered early on. And that way we can ascertain the number, most accurate number that we can. Another thing is, and we're still with our master schedule, I know that this year we had different timelines at each campus because I asked for their timeline. So we will have a district-wide timeline with benchmarks to check that, we're completed a certain faction. That is going to directly correlate with staffing, as Dr. Cruz says. Those courses, the registration, that did commence in March. And before that, in February, they did roll out some information to students, especially our fifth graders moving up into middle, our eighth graders moving up into high school. But yes, we do have to, get ahead of the game there. We also talked about our registration drive, opening up our registration drive in January next year, so that way, we don't only have that historical data, but we can gauge who's registering. And if we open up our registration drive earlier, we're not only registering the kids within our city, we open it up, right? And then other students and other families will know what opportunities are available, but we have to have our courses, our innovative courses, and our CTE courses ready to launch, and use those to entice and bring in students, and prepare them for the future. So we are going to change that timeline. And I know that historical data is still going to be a very strong component of it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so on the individual meetings with principals and directors, those are basically just getting with whoever needs additional help as far as the module or how to calculate or how to do anything having to do with budgets. And then lastly, we continue to meet locally and statewide regarding budgeting strategies. So locally and statewide, that is through TEA, TASB, TASBO. There are so many things that happen actually since in the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot that happens. So there's a lot of communications from OKC and from TSPN. There's just various resources. Our main resource is definitely TASBO and Region 1. So we do attend monthly finance advisory council meetings, and that's where we get representatives from OKC. Actually, Mr. Haney presents to us on a monthly basis. And we have other local agencies that are offering their help. This month it was tax collections and the preliminary values. So Hidalgo County was there, and we just have various support on that side. In April, we continued the staffing reviews, and on our end, that was mostly my part. that is whenever we see that there was an incorrect coding. That was something that our payroll department had to make sure that they were completing on their end to make sure it was all coded correctly. Special populations were due, so that is special ed, bilingual, CTE, and GT, any of those budgets, those were due in April. They had a different due date just because it takes a little bit longer to coordinate with the different campuses. And then continued with the individual meetings with principals and directors. And then we internally had discussions of different compensation plan possibilities. So we are currently working with our 1.5%, 2%, 2.5%, and 3% scenario. Any questions?
Yes.
Okay.
When you say you're currently working on the compensation plan, looking at the different percentages, you're talking about percentage increases, correct?
Correct.
Okay, now, are you also, I don't know if this has been a request that has been made. I want to say it may have been a conversation that I may have had with, I think I had with Ms. Cervellon. Can we, I'd like for the board to be able to see different presentations in reference to those compensation plans, where I feel in looking at compensations and comparing them with other districts, comparable districts, you know, this is my opinion. I think that, like, for example, our administrative teams may already be where they need to be. Not necessarily, but again, if we can see that, so that we can see these percentages where we award them across the board, and whether it's not across, and the other option where it's not across the board, where we have professionals, teachers, perhaps teachers, counselors, librarians, you know, just different ways of presenting that. Are you working on that as well?
We have not talked about the intricacies like at that level.
Okay, it's still early on, but I just think that I'd like to see that worked on and presented. It's not a one-man decision, but it's something that I would like the board to look at. And you know, if now's not the time to discuss that, that's fine, but I would like to see those.
I think in the interest of keeping this part of the meeting true to revenues, we can continue with revenues, but that would also give us enough time for Dr. Cruz to be able to get some of the feedback from TASB and get us some comparisons and
Fair
some
enough.
very good information for
Thank
you
you,
to.
ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Perez, you mentioned earlier that there were some coding issues that needed to get fixed. Can you explain to us what you mean by coding?
So it could be as an example, it could be a teacher that was originally doing a regular math class and is now doing a CTE math class, just for an example. So the regular education would be a different funding code as opposed to the CTE coding. And so as long as we are making sure that we're having those open conversations, like, okay, what is this teacher doing? Is this one still doing special ed? Is that one still doing computer lab? Yes, okay, are they actually doing computer lab? Well, they have 50% that they're doing this. Okay, well then let's split their funding. So those are the kind of conversations that we have to have. And we do that because if we don't, it'll get just messed up really quickly. And it's hard to fix that whenever you have more than a couple of months of not having those conversations. So we do as well as we can with making sure that the campuses are communicating those with us. But at those meetings, that's where we iron out all of those coding issues. And so I know issue sounds like a really bad word. It's just more that we're making sure that we're aligning what the intent of the job is to the funding. And the funding is very important as far as reporting it back to TEA.
That's a daunting task, because we're talking about hundreds of employees, and then when you're talking about split funding, and you know, you have a person that does maybe half-time sped or half-time regular ed, and you look at time and effort and all that, that's a big job. So I can see where that comes into play.
The good thing about it is that we have all the necessary people in those meetings. So federal programs there, he knows, okay, now I need to make sure that this person gets on that split funding list. And special ed is there, so they'll know, okay, they're doing a little bit more over here. So, you know, it's just everybody that needs to be involved in those meetings are involved. HR is really good about making sure that those codes are moving forward correctly, especially when we go towards budget. So that is the biggest part, in my opinion, for me, it's for those staffing reviews.
It's basically just communication, just,
Oh, yeah,
that's all.
definitely. And we give them a good allocated amount of time to go over what their staffing is doing, what they should be doing, any concerns that they might have. It's really good conversations, they really are. So Dr. Cruz does really well with making sure that they have enough time to discuss all of those productively.
Do y'all have anybody that monitors this information? You know, I know you're saying there's different departments involved. You have federal funds, you got state funds, you got local funds, you got special ed department, you know, and all other departments, Kate and so forth, right? So is there anybody that's monitoring this, that's keeping track of this? Because when you're saying this, to me, it seems like it wasn't being kept up with. And for example, when I worked in the district, I managed federal funds. So I knew for a fact, okay, these people need to get paid out of federal funds. And so what came to my mind as you're explaining this is, had that not been happening, or
Oh,
is
no,
there
it does.
somebody that's supposed to monitor this?
It does happen, I'm sorry to interrupt you, go ahead. It does happen, it just, there comes a point where if there is let's just say there's a computer lab instructional aide, and they need her in a different classroom, they're not gonna wait for the paperwork to get done. They're gonna put her in the classroom because that kiddo needs, those kiddos need that instructional aid. And then it just kind of becomes one of those things where like, oh, okay, I'll take care of it later. It happens, and we don't know about it unless we go about talking in these conversations. So that's our way of making sure that we have talked about all of those things. So we do it at the very least once a year.
And Ms. Lopez, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Lopez, also to just further explain that, that's where the principals get together with their directors, and they have those conversations, and principals go talk to, say you're talking about a special ed employee, they talk to the special ed director, you know, I needed to make this change on my campus, I needed him or her to do this, working with regular ed or doing this other assignment, and so that communication is happening, and that's the way it's usually done, correct?
Yes,
That's when
there's
you-
a form, there's a process
Right.
to it. But again, if there's something that comes up and we need that instructional aid at another, we need that teacher to move over, we do what we have to do to make sure that we take care of the kids first.
So, and when you say that you look at this once a year, to me, that is concerning, Ms. Servillon. Is there a process that y'all are looking into to make this process better?
So I believe that we still do this. I know we left it in place. Well, when I was here, it was in place, and I'm sure it still is. There are the campus rosters that go out to the principals. The principal, do you want to elaborate on it? The principals know the funding code that's attached to each person, but go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Servillon. Yes, we do have a formal process that we have in place. We have a form, like Ms. Bettis mentioned, that is reiterated constantly throughout the school year. If there's any change, it must come on that form to HR before the change happens so that we can verify that the coding is correct, the person's appropriately certified, et cetera. You know, like she mentioned, at times those changes happen and we're just learning about it. But we send out our rosters at minimum 2-3 times a year so that they can be verified. It's a constant auditing process in HR, and the HR coordinators do an absolutely fabulous job at it. It's a lot of personnel, a lot of detail per person. But they do a fabulous job. So it's at multiple levels. It's at the HR level, it's at the campus level, it's at the payroll level, it's at the, you know, the accounting level. So there's all kinds of checks and balances constantly happening.
So on those rosters, what happens is the principal reviews them. If there's any adjustments that need to be made, then they fill out the proper paperwork. And I know that the principals have had a lot of training on the funding source and which funding source is connected to the position or the job.
So it's being looked at constantly, it's not something that's being forgotten about.
It was
So
3
we're-
times before last.
Yes, and excuse the interruption. Another thing is that departments are asking for reports monthly. So there are constant reports going back and forth between us all. to check funding.
I personally get a lot of emails that say, hey, can you just check this funding code? Because I just want to make sure that it's correct. So we get that in our office a lot of times. So I know that they are checking it. I don't know that there's, on my end, I don't know that there's, a schedule or anything. So that would be something that Dr. Cruz takes care of. But the overall staffing review is like that main and final place where we go and make sure that everything is ironed out. Throughout the year, I am positive that there are other opportunities for that to be cleaned up.
But we could come up with more definitive dates, and I think we used to have it at the onset of the year, middle of the year, and then we had another one in the spring. So we can look at that process and that timeline.
Okay. So next, we're gonna go over just the tax rates. Over the last 5 years, we have been at the same tax rate of 1.3049. In the last 2 years, we lowered our M&O tax rate because that was part of House Bill 3 that said that we could not exceed a certain amount. So we moved those over to INS. And this year, when working our summary of finances, the maximum compressed rate that we are allowed to tax on the M&O side is 1.0241. And so we explored the option of moving over that 0.009 or 09 into INS, but the INS total is already taxed at the amount that we need to pay for our bond obligations. So that is the most that we should, and that's considering the possibility of maybe a 97% collection rate. So we will, as long as we get 97% of our tax collections, we will have enough for that bond. If we increase the INS, it wouldn't, I don't think it's a good practice, because then we're gonna be collecting more than we should, and I don't want to do that. We should be collecting exactly what we need for our bond obligations. So I did a couple of scenarios to see what it would look like for changing the INS and the M&O tax rates. And I just wanted to give you an idea of what that looks like overall. And I talked to Tasbo. We talked to Tasbo, and she had a couple of ideas on how to make sure that we are taxing correctly, that we're taking into consideration the $40,000 possibility of that homestead exemption, making sure that we are taxing conservatively enough, and also making sure that we're maximizing our dollars for our students. So when you look at this chart, the M&O is exactly what the foundation school program total would be coming to San Benito CISD at that rate. So I even tried going back up to 1.0250, and it still gives me less than the 1.0241. So that is the maximum rate that we should be taxing, and that is called the maximum compressed rate.
For M&O.
Correct. For INS, we're gonna leave it at 0.2799. Any questions so far? So next, we looked up property values, and this property value is the taxable freeze value. So this is the value that we actually get our taxes calculated based off of, and that is minus homestead exemptions. This property value is currently at the 40,000 homestead exemption amount, because I want to be able to make sure that we are budgeting conservatively. So I don't have property values, not gonna lie to you. We don't even have preliminary values. So it seems kind of strange, like how do we build a budget off of property values that we don't know and student counts that we don't know? And it's difficult, it's a very daunting task, but we look at historical trends. So over the last 5 years, I charted out what the property values were, what the difference was, and what the difference in percentage was. And then I got that average of 6.742, and I included that into the $1.2 billion. So $1.2 billion plus an additional 6.7, we get about $1.287 billion of property values. So I think that's pretty fair to say. I really do. see a good trend in our property values, and that's kind of what's helped sustain, the lowered amount of ADA, and those increase of property values gives us just a little bit more in our local funding. The state will eventually equalize. If they see that we're getting too much in property taxes, they're gonna lower our state funding. So, it's best that we keep it at the same rate. Yep, but, I think it's amazing that we have all this wonderful development in San Benito. It has its little effect on our overall amount that we get from the state. It does not have an effect. It has a positive effect on the amount that we get from our tax dollars, but the state will always equalize.
And that amount there on the property values, you're planning on using that for the projected budget?
No,
To
this is
estimate
what I
that-
am anticipating that that TEA will estimate our values at right now. And so the calculation, to answer your question, yes. The calculation would be 1.287 billion. Divide that by $100 per valuation, and multiply that by each of the tax rates. And that's where we get our tax collections. So we're looking at about 12 million in taxes for M&O locally, and about 7.6 million in INS, which is just enough to collect for our debt. So just so you know,
So here, what came to mind was, we have about 20% of our taxes that have not been paid, that are delinquent right now.
Yes.
And if you're estimating an additional 6.7, is that gonna be a good figure? If in reality, we're losing some of the money that was supposed to come in, and we're overestimating what we're gonna be getting. Does that make sense?
I think I might have followed it. So $1.2 billion is not what we're getting. That's
Correct.
just what, it's what TEA is gonna use,
it is what the appraisal district has appraised our property values at.
and that is what TEA is gonna use to decide how much money we get.
That is, yes, actually, yes.
Okay.
But Ms. Bettis, we're not losing anything.
No.
Like,
So the amount that we get from the delinquent taxes, how much portion of our budget are we using our school taxes? The taxes that the public pays and,
How much percentage of it? It's less than 10% of our entire budget that's on tax collections.
okay, so less than 10% of our budget is on tax collections. So whether they're delinquent or not really doesn't play into effect when we're creating the budget for next year.
I don't account for delinquent taxes. Whenever I look at how much we're gonna get on our tax collections, I account for about approximately 96% collection rate, because I understand that some of them are not gonna pay. And so I also don't account for the past delinquents. If we get it, great, but I'm not counting on anybody to pay it. I don't wanna have that budget dependent on whether or not somebody pays their delinquent amounts. So the budget does not take into consideration that we are collecting the full amount, just about 96%, and we do not take into consideration any other delinquent amounts that should be paid. So it's not overestimating, it's actually underestimating it.
So the number that's being presented to us right now on the screen is the number that TEA will be using to determine how much.
This is
The number that the appraisal district
appraisal,
gave us
yeah.
that TEA.
because they don't, like I said, they have not done the preliminary, they have not submitted their preliminary values. And even then, the preliminary values are still subject to being appealed.
Right.
And those could lower by as much as another 7%. So this is a very conservative amount considering our trend in the past.
What you said makes a lot of sense, that you'll be estimating 96%. However, in my opinion, I'd always want to be conservative in how we set up the budget than for us to overspend and then later, be on
Yes.
a negative.
I agree with you, ma'am.
And that is exactly what we took into account. We wanted to underestimate
Yes.
our revenue so that way we would be okay. If you want to go ahead and point that out as well.
Yes, we did talk about what our previous, let me see if I have, let me see here. Nope. Hold on, let me see if I can find that. Okay, so this is historically what we've received in revenues from the state, from TEA. So based on what we've received before and the amounts that we used, we are looking at getting 77 million compared to the last 5 years. So when I say that there's an equalization, there truly is. If we're not receiving it from taxes, we're gonna receive it from TEA. So that's why it doesn't seem like a big change, but the biggest change is going to be in what we do locally. So how much are people are doing here as far as paying their taxes? How many games are being played and how many are being attended? Because that's a big part of our revenue, it really is. The athletic events, how much students are actually coming in and eating, because we get paid based off of our reimbursements. If they're not here, we're not going to get a reimbursement for them, but we still have to cook food for them just in case they do show up. So that all of those things have a bigger impact, in my opinion, because the M&O is from the state, and that will always be equalized and controlled by TEA.
On the change on the 2020, 2021, and then the next one after that, 2021, 22, it went down about 4 million. Why does that happen?
On this historical revenues, or was there another?
Yes, on this chart that you have right
Oh,
now.
from 20, well, in 2020 to 2021, there was $4 million that was reduced, and that was from the CARES Act. So we received $4.7 million, and that was the year that they said, we're gonna give you these federal monies, but we're gonna take it out of your state. It was very disheartening because we actually budgeted, because they told us we're going to give you money, and I'm sure, Mr. Mora, I know you completely understand that one. It was rough. It was horrible.
We're all excited because we get the money and then boom.
So it was very disheartening when they said, yeah, we'll give it to you, but, give it back. And it kind of it doesn't make sense to me. That I understand the intent of what the CARES Act was, but if that was the case, then I would have spent the money just a little bit differently, because they told us, oh, this is only for COVID, but they took away the money that was for everything. So that was a very rough moment there for us.
And that affected our rating, right?
Yes,
It
that
did affect
affected
the
the rating. It affected that, plus the decline in ADA that we had. That had a huge negative impact on us. And it was, like I said, it was not something that we could have planned for. There was no way we could have planned for that part. It was a huge blow to us.
And I think that that's exactly my point, that if we can underspend, in other words, not overspend, that might help us. Because I saw that other districts, I know when you did a presentation, there were other districts that
Yes.
still got their A rating. So my question at that point was, how did they maintain the A rating? What did they do so that this CARES situation didn't affect them?
That was also an administration change at that point.
I'm sorry,
There was also a change in administration at that point.
for us?
We can talk about that later though, ma'am.
So, but you were overseeing. We still had someone overseeing,
Yes,
yeah.
but I was still under somebody else's direction at that point. So.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Let me go back. We talked about property values. Next up, let's talk about enrollment in ADA. So this is probably the ugliest page for me. It's disgusting. So Mr. Cortez and I worked on this one tirelessly. What's that, sir? It's, and that's based off of historical trends. How much have we been losing over the last few years? How much does our enrollment look like, and what does our actual ADA? And those numbers are based off of what we had on TEA and TAPER reports. So what I did was I looked at what we currently have, and if you look at the last enrollment number, we do have 9280 on there, so that is the last number that I've used. The last ADA number is what I've gotten from the TEA website. And so one of the things that has changed is that they've told us that we're gonna have a hold harmless for this year. And the hold harmless is based off of the best 6 weeks in this year compared to the best 6 weeks before, and I believe it's 1920. And so if 1920 was higher, then we're gonna be granted that amount. Our amount is 94% ADA. So that means whatever we get this year, they're going to count it at 94% ADA. Yes, there will be an amount that will be owed back to the district based on what our actual ADA is and what they said that we are held harmless to.
So anything below the 94%?
Yep, yes, sir. So there's an adjustment that's already embedded in the summary of finance, but again, I don't want to give out that number just yet because I don't have actual tax numbers, I don't have actual ADA numbers, and I might say a number and TEA is going to say a totally different number. So we got the 9280, and the average ADA that we've had over the last few weeks actually is anywhere from 85 to 94. And we looked at the average of the last 5 weeks, and we're at about 90% attendance rate. So I multiplied 9,280 by what 90% would be, and that's where we came up with 8730. Well, the 7857, I'm sorry, for ADA. So that is a projected number. It is not a very pretty number. We've worked on some extra efforts on registration. They've done really well with, the campuses have done very well. We've had, let me see.
I've seen that, the different campuses are doing their different initiatives to try to recruit more, and then we've got this other thing coming up this coming Thursday. And so the initiatives are there, and we just need to entice these people to show them all the good things that we've got to offer in San Benito, and hopefully that projected amount will prove us wrong.
It's a difference of over 1,700 students,
Yes.
5 years.
Let me show you in the current year, the last 3 years, I'm sorry. So we got this enrollment history from the TAPER reports. And we just kind of went over, EC is early childhood, pre-K, kinder, first, and so on. And over the last 3 years, the difference is at the bottom. Those are negative amounts of difference with the exception of 11th grade. In my opinion, when I saw that the enrollment was going down, my opinion was, and it was kind of something that we talked about over in Finance Council, was that it's mostly pre-K because when COVID came around, pre-K was not a grade level that was required, so why would they want to go and put their kiddos in that kind of environment if they didn't have to? So you can see from 1920 to 2021 that pre-K went down significantly. That was also around the time that we implemented the 3-year-old program. Well, around the time. So it did not do us very well. That was probably the biggest area. 4th grade obviously is another big area, but pre-K, it's a big funding. Every single one of them is a big piece of our funding, but they didn't need to be here, so. Yep. So one of the biggest questions that comes up is, well, where did they go? I seriously don't know where they go. I mean, we've seen the reports from Region 1 on the budgeting tools. We can track a good portion of those that go to different campuses and districts, but I believe that the biggest part of it is in the pre-K area. So that's one of the areas that we're hoping to be able to gain. One of the other things that we see as you go from one year to another, is that because of that, they lack the social emotional skills and that time being read to. So first grade is a very hard grade level for them to be in because they haven't had a chance to be in front of a teacher. They've been in front of an iPad and a tablet during online classes, but so first grade is also the grade level that we offer an additional teacher because it is helping with the learning gap in that area. That's something that we pay out of ESSER.
Ms. Perez, we don't have a copy of this. Can we get a copy of it?
Oh yeah, definitely. I will email these to you. This was on board docs, but this slide I just added today, actually.
Ms. Perez, I'm looking at the budgeting tools from Region 1 that you mentioned earlier. And we have lost, of course, 160 to our neighboring district over here, and then 77 to one of the charter schools.
Yes.
And so those are the biggest competitors right now. And you mentioned pre-K. We lost 53 pre-K students to just one school district. So the numbers are pretty big, like you're saying, right?
Yes.
But one of the things that was mentioned to me was the pre-K students, do we have a full day for them, or is it half day?
No, it's a full day.
It's a full day. When did that start? Do you know what year?
I remember it being, I don't recall.
I want to say that it's at least 4 years or 5.
I know that
we've had full day.
Yes. I know
Okay.
that we also incorporated the Niños Head Start kids so that if they were in a Head Start class, then they can go the other half a day over to a regular class, to one of our classes.
Right, okay. 'cause
Head
the
Start is
data-
half a day.
The data here is from 2019-20.
Yes.
That's more recent, right?
Yes,
Because we
right
wouldn't,
before it,
because we wouldn't be able to see that we lost pre-K kids if they were never here.
right.
Also, our partnership with Head Start, if the students go in the afternoon with Head Start, they can stay there until 5:30 so that their parents can, that have, go to a job.
How many Head Start schools do we have?
We have, go
We originally had, I know we recently had at least 3 or 4, and Ms. Servillon and Ms. Alvarado and Dr. Cruz and I were talking about extending that out and asking them like if they want to set up some in the country schools and some of the other areas that could utilize that so that we can, quite honestly, be able to bring those kids back in and we can get ADA off of them. The kids get educated and
The instructors are paid through San Benito School District, or they're paid through Head Start?
no, ma'am, if they are in Head Start, they get paid, those teachers get paid from Head Start.
So they're just using our facilities, essentially?
Depending if they have their own, obviously if they have their own facility, right, that's good. But I do know that they were at one point renting from us because I remember invoicing for the use of our buildings.
So we do have, how do I say it? We do have Head Starts that are on campus, and then what you're suggesting is utilize the Head Starts that are off campus and maybe bus them to our campuses the other half of the day?
We have not talked about that
Okay.
part.
no, the MOU with Head Start is that they come onto our campus. That facilitates the process for the
Yes.
parents because they may have other children at the campus. So no, the partnership would be with using our site,
Okay, and then we count them for our ADA.
yes.
And the reason I mentioned like possibly having their own buildings coming in is because I have seen where they bring in some portable units and they set up shop and
Actually, Ms. Perez, based on the data, I read it incorrectly, so I apologize about that. So it wasn't 53 students that left us from pre-K. It was actually only 9 students that left us, based on this report here that we have from Region 1. The big issues seem to be first grade, there was 55 students, second grade, 47, and sixth grade was 51, and then you have again ninth grade, 51. So those are the bigger ones. And total of that is 503 students that left us total from pre-K through 12th grade. So the bigger issues are those grade levels that I mentioned, and that's based on the historical data here.
the 500 is about right for each year that we've we've seen the decline. That's about how much we can expect to see. That's been about the average? Yes.
So if you add up all your elementary, you have first grade through fifth grade at 135 students that left us, and then you have middle school, 64, and then high school, 34 students. So it's the elementary that we're
That is what.
we're lacking.
I think it's like that statewide, it's the elementary, they usually come back for secondary because we have the extracurriculars. But what we can do is, let's look at charters and see what grade levels, because they add grade levels every year, and see if that correlates with our losses.
I believe, the charter in town is already at their grade levels. They're no longer adding anymore. It would have to be the neighboring cities.
And there's Jubilee now. So I don't know what grade levels Jubilee has started.
Yeah, that's why, but there's not one in San Benito yet.
But next door.
Yeah, next door. That's why we need to look at the neighboring cities' charter schools and see what's going on there.
And we have on this report, Triumph, Horizon, those are some of the charter schools that we have here. Well, even though they're in Brownsville, our kids are still, they still went over there. Yeah, they went over there. And so one of the things that I want to say is previously they had, the district had hired a marketing company to help, but obviously the numbers keep going down, and I appreciate Ms. Servillon with these new efforts of trying to recruit students. I did see a lot of that advertisement as well, and we even, I received some banners
Flyers.
also to put up. And so I'm just thankful that you're looking into what other measures we can do and not getting stuck on the same old that's not working, and you're looking into new measures. So appreciate that, Ms. Servillon.
And I'm pretty sure that those registration efforts that we've been doing they're gonna really show a lot of growth in those areas. I really am confident that that's gonna happen.
Us as board members, we go to conferences and we usually interact with superintendents and other board members. And I was speaking to a neighboring district here in the valley, and I asked them, how did enrollment go for you? And this was last year at the South Padre Island Conference. And that superintendent told me, oh man, we're doing awesome, and I'm like, man, our enrollment dropped. And he said, oh no. And he talked about some of the initiatives that he did, which I presented to Ms. Servillon as well. And she's taking the role of implementing some of those the same things that he did. So I'm looking forward to seeing some growth as well, because that's what worked for them, and so I'm always looking at what works so we can try it out too.
So this slide we've already looked through. Does anybody have any questions about this slide? And then again, whatever is highlighted in yellow, just please understand that those are my estimates. So some other budget discussions, we did talk about the hold harmless. I wanted to go over some of the ESSER 3 plans that we have for the district. You can give me a second. I don't have that as part of the PowerPoint, but it is available on the website. So in 22-23, we do have the rebound plan that we're going to be doing. We're going to continue to fund that. We are purchasing several more buses, about 4-5 more buses, one of them being special ed, some small buses, and those small buses are meant to, one of the things with ESSER is that it says that you need to plan just in case there is a closure. So the small buses we're able to utilize them universally. We don't need a certified CDL bus driver, and if we needed to, that can be used by anybody to go and deliver meals to the homes. So the nurses, all of the nurses' pay will be be paid out of ESSER. HVAC projects, we have $300,000 extra coming out of ESSER 3 for HVAC projects. Longevity pay and mid-year stipends will be out of ESSER 3. Our instructional coaches are paid out of there. Any Region 1 resource is going to be paid out of ESSER 3, excuse me. Technology salaries, after-school program, some part of after-school program. The first grade teachers that we talked about, we made sure that we had an extra first grade teacher if If they need additional ones, they can, based on the student-to-teacher ratio at that point.
What's the projected student-to-teacher ratio for first grade?
Dr. Cruz, do you have that?
What's the projected student-to-teacher ratio for first grade?
We start looking at it if they have more than 20. I know that's
They
my
do,
alarm.
and so, although we had, had an effort to increase the number of teachers in first grade, we had difficulty filling vacancies. And so there were staff that were moved around, trying to accommodate, so we're still trying to fill those, positions. I'm guessing if we were to fill them, 17, it'd be below 22.
I guess that would be the better question. What is the goal student-to-teacher ratio with those additional ESSER teachers?
Below 22.
Yes.
22 would
22 is
be-
the state level.
So the goal with the extra teachers, 22?
Well, to decrease the class size to where we aren't serving the standard 22 to 1, 22 to 25 to 1 at times.
So looking at our enrollment report, just to piggyback off of that, on some campuses, that is working because we have 3 teachers, it should be 2 teachers, or there are 5 teachers, it should be 4 teachers. But there were 2 campuses that we noticed they are actually over the 22, so there we need a teacher, but they haven't been able to find a teacher. And we need to lower those numbers. So we talked a little bit about that, I think, Monday.
Yes.
So with those teachers that are above the 22 to 1 ratio, we do have, do we have anything in writing that will allow us to have that overage? We do? The waivers? Okay.
And then the other thing that we take care of out of ESSER is any overtime for the transportation department. And that's mostly because that department is also hard to fill. And so we do have a large amount of overtime that happens because of the smaller size staff there.
Okay, so all of these things are gonna be paid out at ESSER. What's gonna happen when ESSER's done?
This is meant to supplant so that we can build our fund balance.
Okay.
And after that, the intent of ESSER 3 was if you were supplanting, it was supposed to be able to cushion that COVID cliff, so that whenever we do have to go back to full funding, then we have a cushion for that.
So it's not that we don't have the money to pay these out of our own
Correct.
reservoir, it's just so that we can
We can build the fund balance and
strategically supplant this time.
correct. So we will take care of the salaries that are COVID related, such as the technology and the nurses and the extra duty for the bus drivers, so that we can, that's not like a huge amount, so that whenever it comes time, all of these other things are extras. But the payroll is just those strategically considered ones. So whenever we get back to our regular budget in 2024, then we should be able to sustain or pull just a little bit and wane it off. So that is the
These are
intent.
positions that you already had, that you were already budgeting for, but because we have this ESSER funds, now you can supplant with that money first, and like you said, save the money that we were using from the district temporarily. And then
Yes.
you would just go back to using the budget again, like you were before.
And the reason is because we only have 3 years to spend the money. So 45 million is a lot to spend, so we had to make sure that we were getting what we needed, making sure that we're maintaining what the school looks like or would need if we had to close again. God forbid that happens. But so we made some little puzzle pieces, moved them around so that we can make sure that we're taking care of our instructional needs, our COVID needs, and our overall student needs for the school district if we have to close. And the last is TASB salary study information. I just wanted to make sure that y'all had, I'm pretty sure that Dr. Cruz had given an update, but just in case y'all needed another update on where we are overall with that part. Dr. Cruz?
At this time, TASB is working on their final analysis, of our pay plans, I'm hoping to hear from them in the next, week or so, since we have our May committee board meeting coming up. That was the timeframe that I had given them. If we are planning a future or, intermediate board budget workshop, that would be some additional time that they would have. So we're coming up to at least get feedback from them on those plans.
So the last slide in this part of the presentation is going to be talking about what you see our next budget workshop looking like. Normally, I would have put it in with our committee meetings. I personally think that these meetings here need their own individual time. I mean, the committee meetings are long enough as it is. I want to be able to make sure that y'all have whatever questions y'all have out in the air, and we can iron out whatever we need. So we could do May 17th or the 24th.
Personally, I think the 17th will be better because 24th is the last week of school, if I'm not mistaken, right?
These are not set in stone, by the way.
And I'd like to consider changing those dates from Tuesdays to another day.
That's fine.
Possibly Monday, because even on the 24th, we have a San Benito High School Scholars Recognition Ceremony that I'm sure we'll be invited to if we haven't been yet. And so I would prefer to move the June 7th, June 14th, and June 21st. That's summer, not necessarily summer, but I don't have any problems with that. But the 17th and the 24th, I'd like us to consider moving the day, possibly to Monday.
So looking at the calendar, we have Monday the 16th or the 23rd or the 30th.
Any of those, well, the 30th is Memorial Day.
Yeah, I
No,
think,
not the
So
30th.
no, we have
I
the
would do the
16th and the
16th.
23rd.
You
But
want to do this?
You're looking at, we're needing two separate meetings for each. I mean, each one of those is a separate meeting, correct?
The May meeting and the June meeting. And quite honestly, for the May, these are difficult times because we would want to make sure that we have enough time for TASB to get their information for
Correct.
us. But I also want us to have enough time to go over that before we adopt the budget, which would normally be on June 14th, unless we move it up an additional week so that you have time to go over it. I just don't want it to be one of those things that we slip in and we don't have enough time to discuss. That's my only concern.
So then, once again, I'd like to recommend either the 16th or the 23rd, and what you're saying is the earlier the better, probably, so the 16th possibly
27th.
of May?
That's fine. And the only thing that would be a hindrance is if TASB has not responded to us by then. Would you like for me to notify you if that hasn't happened so that we can move it over?
Sure, we can, if it hasn't happened, then we can move it down to the 23rd.
Okay.
I won't be here on the 23rd.
You won't?
I'm out of town.
Do you have a different date in mind? We can do Thursday, Wednesday, either one of those days is fine with me as well.
Wednesday's fine with me as well.
But that would
I
be
don't-
only as an alternate if we do not have TASB information
On the
as of the
16th,
16th.
right.
Okay,
Okay.
That's Plan B.
yes.
Plan A is the 16th, Plan B the 25th.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, for the June meeting, we normally would have done a budget workshop on June 7th, which is maybe less than a week and a half, 2 weeks from the 25th, and adopt on the 14th. Would you like to move it up so that we have a little bit more time to discuss budget?
So-
I think that that is a good idea, just because,
So June 7th would be our committee meeting original date.
correct. And the regular board meeting would be on the 14th.
And that's when we need to adopt,
That's when we need to adopt no later than June 30th.
June 30th, right?
So if we do the 21st, we have time to discuss, and God forbid we don't have a quorum or we need something else changed, we still have time to come back and redo a meeting if we need to.
The
You want to go with the 21st?
the 21st.
Are y'all, everybody's okay with that date? Does
So that would
anybody
be
have
a
any-
budget,
That would be the adoption day. It would be a special board meeting for adoption. And the reason I'm trying to solidify those dates is because I do need to post in the newspaper 10 to 30 days
Right.
before, no more than 30 days, no less than 10. And so if we have to move it, then I can advertise again, but it
So
gets
that would
really
be
tight.
on that 21st, it would be the hearing and the adoption of, correct?
I can do the, no, the hearing has to be a week before. So I can do a budget hearing as part of the regular board meeting or after the board meeting, however you want to do it.
We could probably do the hearing on the 14th before the regular board meeting.
That's fine. And the hearing is mostly talking about what it's going to be at the function level and whatever questions y'all might have.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, we can do the hearing and the adoption on the same day. I'm sorry.
We can?
Yes. We can.
So then let's say the 21st then?
Yes. So then, do you want to continue with the budget workshop on the 7th or, no, we said Monday, right? Did I confuse y'all?
Yes.
So, do you want to have a different budget workshop in June? Where we discuss all of the revenues and the expenditures and what it looks like overall? Or do y'all want to have that as part of the hearing?
Okay.
I guess this would kind of be the June committee meeting. I say we just add it onto there since it's already summer.
I'm
If it's
okay
gonna
with that.
be- I'm okay with the longer meeting.
Well,
I
at that,
agree with that, during the committee meeting.
okay, at that point, we will already have revenues talked about, expenses is gonna be the next part. And then June is more like wrapping it all up and tying together all the different loose ends and the little pieces that maybe y'all aren't comfortable or y'all have questions about.
And then your email is always open if we have any
Absolutely.
questions in between.
Yes. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? None?
I have some questions about the paper that was included in our wrap-up last month, or this past month, I don't know. The MOE,
Okay,
that amount that we have to pay back to TEA will fall into this budget that we're planning?
in this current budget, actually. So I do have some slides prepared just in case, because I did want to discuss that with y'all. So I'm gonna show you, this is the page that y'all received a copy of, right? That second test is the one that we usually go by.
I think this information needs to be discussed in an executive session and not in open session at this point.
That's fine.
Do you agree, Mr. Wooler?
There's certainly parts of it that could be discussed in closed. Yes, sir. I'm sure there are aspects of it that involve legal consultation, so those parts of it could be discussed in closed.
Whatever's most comfortable for everybody, I'm okay with.
I say we discuss it in closed.
So, hold on.
So if we don't have a closed session on the agenda, we'll have to reschedule this discussion to another time?
Yes, sir. I don't believe we do have a closed session
We don't.
aspect of this meeting. So you could discuss it at the next budget meeting. We could make sure that you have an agenda that allows for closed session, and you could do it at that time.
I can also send you the notes that I have on this PowerPoint so that you can you're more than welcome to call me and we can talk it over. It's definitely something that needs to be like actually discussed because
When is the final amount due to,
not until
Right.
June.
That's-
This is the preliminary amount. I don't anticipate that it's going to change. And the final amount is usually sent out in June. Historically, it has been.
I agree that we should discuss this in executive session, and however, whatever is important to announce to the public, that we also announce to the public whatever they need to know.
Certainly.
But with that said as well, I think that if you would forward us that information, and if we as individuals have questions, I know you're open to the communication, we can call and ask you and get some further explanation prior to going into the next committee meeting or executive session.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
Without having an illegal forum, right? Because not all 7 of us can call her, or 4 of us ask questions about that. Mr. Weller?
It's not a decision-making, it's more informational. If it was a decision, then that would be different, but this is just informational. It would be no different than the information that I give y'all on a weekly basis on our board briefs.
Did you copy that, Mr. Weller? That is correct, right? Or is there, I see you, if say 4 of us have questions that we call Ms. Bettis and we're discussing this, I don't see us making any decision. It's just information being shared.
I mean, board members are entitled to obtain information. You know, you just, when you have 4 board members obtaining information on the same topic outside of a meeting, you know, it would probably be better to do that in closed. Even though, you know, there's not an intent to, you know, work your way around the
So I will send you notes with
Requirement
as
for a
much
meeting.
information so that you don't have questions.
Okay.
All right.
Any other questions?
None.
Anyone? Okay. So that was 1.5 general finance questions and answers. If there are no further questions, do I have a motion to adjourn?
If it's general finance, we can ask on anything in the finance department? Okay. On the forensic audit, how is that going?
So on the forensic audit, the last update that I gave Ms. Servillon, we have had several of our directors interviewed, and we have had some samples selected, and
I'm questioning, is that something that we discussed? I mean, is that a general finance concern? We're talking about a forensic audit, and I don't think that falls under.
I don't have details. I
Yeah.
will not give details.
Because you shouldn't have any details at this
No.
point, neither should we. So, Mr. Weller, I'm just wanting to be cautious, not that we're trying to hide anything, but, you know, we're talking about general finance questions, and I don't think, in my opinion, that the forensic audit that is being conducted falls under this category. If I'm incorrect, please let me know.
It's a budget workshop. I mean, I think that any question about the audit would need to relate to the budget.
So it would?
Well, it would need to relate to a budgetary issue.
Got it. Are we going to, the money that we've already approved to pay for the forensic audit is in last year's budget, correct?
It is in this current year budget. We have moved $150,000 from fund balance over to our regular expense account.
And are we gonna have to continue to budget into this next fiscal year's?
As of right now, we're gonna have to continue to budget an additional amount. We've already reached that threshold. And so the next board meeting, I will be asking for an additional amount. And most likely that'll carry over into the next fiscal budget.
So it will play into this.
I will not include it as part of the budget. I will continue to ask for fund balance for that.
Okay, so it's like kind of just this similar way where we did like the parking lot and things like that, just moving it over. Okay.
Yes. Any other questions?
I don't think so. So motion to adjourn once again?
Can
Okay.
we, sorry. On that note, can we get a list of projects that may have to spill over into this budget?
Yes,
Okay.
I will have that for you.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Medrano. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Rudy Corona. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Motion carries 5-0. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, Ms. Perez.